Good afternoon, everyone. A very warm welcome to Lexplosion's continuing series of webinars. Thank you for sparing the time to join us for a session today on Business Responsibility and Sustainability Report, the future of environmental, social, and governance compliances in India. I, Soham Thakur, am joined by my colleague Antara Dasgupta and Pragya Saraf today. All of us are lawyers in Lexplosion, along with our esteemed panelists, Ms. Saloni Phadnis from Asian Paints and Mr. Gaurang Shah from Ajanta Pharma, to discuss the key challenges which the top 1,000 listed entities are currently facing to report the Business Responsibility and Sustainability Report.
Soham, if I may, just wanted to quickly clarify to the audience that the top 1,000 listed entities are based on market capitalization calculated as on 31st March of every financial year, which is typically through a list rolled out by the stock exchanges. Also, while this report is mandatory currently for the top 1,000 listed entities from financial year 22-23 onwards, it is likely to extend to all companies in a staggered manner, and we will speak more on this as we advance with the session today.
Thank you so much, Antara. We will have the question and answer session towards the end of this discussion. This is for the audience. You may post your questions in the chat window and we will get back to you with our responses.
Thank you for that introduction, Soham and Antara. As you must rightly know, BRSR will serve as a single comprehensive source of non-financial sustainability information that is relevant to all the business stakeholders, which would include investors, shareholders, regulators, and even the public at large. The disclosures in the BRSR are based on the 9 principles of the National Guidelines on Responsible Business Conduct. BRSR is a non-financial disclosure on environment, social and governance parameters, which was notified by SEBI in May 2021. This notification mandates the top 1,000 listed companies to file the BRSR as part of the annual report from financial year 2022 to 2023 onwards.
Pragya, if I can stop you there and if I can explain what these non-financial parameters are. So with ESG taking the center stage in India along with global economies, organizations are no longer evaluated on their financial performance only, but also on the basis of their accountability towards the environment, the efforts they have taken in ensuring bias-free and safe workplaces, following diversity practices in the boardroom and across the remuneration pattern, inculcating an ethically sound work culture, fostering inclusive workforce, and making the premises accessible to the differently abled people. BRSR is the medium through which businesses need to demonstrate responsible and sustainable conduct by providing evidence-based data against the various disclosures required in the report.
That's very insightful, Antara. Now, if we quickly look at the gradual extension of the ambit of BRR since 2012, we see that SEBI has mandated the top 100 listed entities to file the BRR based on the National Voluntary Guideline Principles. It got extended to the top 500 in 2015, which further got extended to the top 1,000 listed entities in 2019. So, do you notice some kind of a trend over here?
So, of course, yes, Pragya. So, there is definitely a trend here. And if we analyze it, we would see that the scope of BRR reporting was gradually widened to include more and more companies. Although BRSR has started with the top 1,000 listed entities, the MCA committee report that we were already referring to earlier has recommended the reporting of BRSR Lite by unlisted companies who are currently not doing any kind of sustainability reporting. The report also suggests a 5-year time period for BRSR to be extended to all the listed as well as the unlisted companies in a phased manner and can even percolate down to larger private organizations in future. We can probably now go through the 9 principles of the BRSR and discuss some of the practical examples associated with it. So principle 1 of the BRSR lays down that the businesses should conduct and govern themselves with integrity and in a manner that is ethical, transparent, and accountable. So currently, organizations may be having provisions on ethical and transparent business conduct as a part of their code of conduct or maybe as a part of an appointment letter. So this principle requires you to disclose the number of trainings that has been imparted to the board of directors, the key managerial personnel, employees, and the workers with respect to the anti-bribery and the anti-corruption policies that an entity may have in place.
Soham, I would like to clarify that the types of policies to be factored in would depend on one's business operations. For instance, if an organization is into the business of granting loans, then there would be additional policy requirements like the whistleblower policy, the fair practices code, the prevention of money laundering policy, and policies on related party transactions, to name a few. So, in addition to the anti-corrupt and anti-bribery policies, these are also policies which organizations would have to factor in, depending on what they work on, what are their lines of businesses.
Absolutely agree with you, Antara, on that. So, going forward, this principle also requires disclosure on whether such trainings are imparted to the value chain partners of an entity, so that the same can be understood and then adopted and implemented throughout the operations of their business. This may require the entities reporting the BRSR to incorporate such clauses as a part of the contracts in the vendor onboarding process. So it therefore implies that also a record or a track needs to be maintained of all these trainings for all the vendors across all the operating units. Additionally, record maintenance relating to the number of complaints received by an entity on conflict of interest of the board of directors or the key managerial personnel seem imperative for being able to make the corresponding disclosure in the report.
The principle 2 of the BRSR report prescribes companies to provide goods and services in a manner that is sustainable as well as safe. Entities now, what they need to do is disclose whether they have procedures for sustainable sourcing. This means that social, ethical, and environmental performance, all factors needs to be integrated into the processing of selecting suppliers. As a part of this process, entities may now need to alter their existing contracts with vendors and also incorporate sustainable sourcing clauses into prospective vendor contracts. This would then flow further down to the entire value chain. Again, for example, if we take a manufacturing industry, they would now be required to disclose the percentage of cycled and reused input materials being used in the manufacturing processes as against the total input of raw materials. In essence, this means that that providing recycled and reused raw materials becomes the responsibility of the vendors or suppliers, therefore inculcating these principles down to all levels of businesses and organizations.
So Pragya, if I can stop you there. So effectively, does this mean that going forward, large organizations may only prefer engaging with vendors who are compliant in this aspect? For instance, if you look at organizations, they outsource most of their functions, like say for instance, the vendor management, for instance, transportation. For that matter, even canteen facilities are outsourced to other vendors. So would it be right to say that going ahead, unless a vendor or a supplier or anybody in the value chain for that matter is ESG compliant, large organizations would not prefer to engage with them?
Indeed, that is what it appears to be, Andhra.
Sure. So you may go ahead and take us through the principle 3 of the NGPRC guideline.
So, Principle 3 now requires companies to respect and promote the well-being of all employees, including those in the value chain. So, as a part of this principle, we see that there is a requirement to disclose whether workplaces have necessary accessibility provisions in line with the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act of 2016. As a result of this, there is an increasing focus of companies to occupy buildings and premises which are hassle-free even for persons with disabilities. Additionally, there is also a disclosure requirement pertaining to skill upgradation initiatives that are taken by the companies for its employees and workers. We know that some companies sponsor further degree courses and education in order to upskill their workforce. It not only benefits the organization, but also provides career development opportunities to the employees and workers. However, in the absence of any statutory mandate for this requirement, companies may now be required to maintain records of all such skill upgradation programs that have been undertaken by them. In line with this, there might also be cost implications for the companies which they now need to factor in.
Soham, that's a fair number of disclosures that this report requires. And as you mentioned that some disclosures may not currently be statutorily mandated, I would like to further highlight that requirements of granting, say for instance, paternity leave. It is not yet a statutory mandate in India. Lots of companies do it because they follow their global policies. As well as for that matter, the complementary rules around creche under the Maternity Benefit Amendment Act has not yet been rolled out by several states. We've noticed just 4 or 5 states bringing out draft versions of these creche rules. So it's practically impossible to implement the rule in spirit yet, but the report still wants an organization to go ahead and disclose these, whether to notice that whether the employee well-being measures at all are in place or not. You also spoke about accessibility to the disabled. We can also get a slight deviation in the way real estate developers may be wanting to plan their business operations differently. For instance, they might want to construct businesses and buildings which are having ramps, which are able to factor disabled people to come to office at all. Then they would also prefer to focus on making businesses and buildings having green certification, because for all you know, investors would be looking at those kind of buildings to go ahead and occupy for their organizations to be not in flout of the ESG parameters. So therefore, as we see the differently abled employees, there are a set of harmonized guidelines which need to be followed by these real estate promoters going forward. So what is your view on that? Like, do you think that the law is trying to go over and above what is currently in place and making other things also part of good practices?
Antara, with respect to this, I think the law is absolutely aiming to go over and above the statutory like the general requirement of carrying on a business, and going forward to ensure that companies look out at the environment, social, and the governance impacts that they have, to bring them in line with the processes and make them very sustainable, so that going forward they rank well in their ESG parameters, and which would obviously help them in the long run as well. And with respect to this report as well, I would want to mention that there is another disclosure on the total recordable work-related injuries, which not only captures the serious injuries, but also any day that is away from work due to any kind of work-related injury or ill health of an employee or worker. So the Employees Compensation Act of 1923 does not currently have any provision with respect to recording of this total number of hours of work-related injuries in a workplace. Therefore, companies should now start maintaining this detailed data for them to be able to accurately make this disclosure.
So I'm going forward. Principle 4 of the NGRBC principle requires businesses to respect the interests of and be responsible to all its stakeholders. So, for example, the disclosures in this principle stresses that the business operations of a company not only affects its shareholders or investors, but it goes a step beyond to and affects all its stakeholders, including, for example, the environment and society at large. It requires companies to see their responsibility towards the vulnerable and the marginalized groups as well. The relevant disclosures on this aspect under this principle captures information on identified list of stakeholders, the frequency at which they engage with them, and the channels through which they engage. So say for example, if a manufacturing industry has set up a factory in an area which is adjacent to a village, it has to ensure that the operations carried out in its factories does not adversely affect the village. The company should have regular interactions with the people of the villages to understand if they are being affected with their operations in any manner, and also take steps to address any concerns that they may have.
Moving on from principle 4, principle 5 lays down disclosures on how businesses should respect and promote human rights. So as a part of this principle, companies are now required to disclose information on the total percentage of the employees, including non-permanent workers, to whom trainings have been provided on human rights issues. For example, the trainings on prevention of sexual harassment policy, the equal opportunity policy, the wage policy, to name a few. So disclosures related to non-permanent workers in this aspect indicates that such trainings would now be required to cover the value chain partners as well. The entities may thus need to incorporate the human rights clauses as a part of all their agreements and contracts to ensure that the essence percolates down to all levels of business. Conducting a proper human rights due diligence might be the need of the hour, which identifies, prevents, mitigates, and accounts for how they address the human rights, adverse impacts of human rights on employees and workers.
So, Soham, if I may, it will be important at this juncture to convey to the audience that going ahead, a fair amount of disclosures are being required in this report, and all of this needs to be consolidated for your entity. So you would have to go down to the unit level to fetch and maintain this data. So the advice and recommendation is to embrace this report before you fall of the law going forward. So it's important to start planning to be BRSR compliant because there's a fair amount of comprehensive data which is required. So for instance, further to what Soham just said, there are requirements of even mentioning whether you are paying minimum wage and if you are paying above the minimum wage. So basically, beyond maintaining registers, which we have historically seen labor laws covering, now you also need to by gender percentage demarcation of what percentage of your male force, your female workforce are discriminated basis the minimum wages. So this is another important aspect of Principle 5, which organizations will need to start planning.
Indeed, Antara, the data collection is a very important aspect of how the BRSR is going to function. So, moving ahead with the principle 6 of the BRSR, we see that it requires businesses to respect and to make efforts to protect and restore the environment. As a part of this principle, it is important for entities to recognize that environment responsibility is a prerequisite for sustainable economic growth and well-being of society. Thus they look at the effects that their operations have on pollution, biodiversity, use of natural resources, climate change, etc. Companies would be required to disclose the total amount of waste generated for each category of waste. For example, biomedical waste, hazardous waste, plastic waste, e-waste, etc. The corresponding disclosures tries to capture information relating to the quantities of such waste that are recycled, reused, or recovered. This effectively weds with the disclosures relating to the extended producer responsibility under Principle 2. This has an overreaching implication to have a quantitative understanding of whether EPR is being followed as per the extended producer responsibility plan required to be submitted.
Pragya, if I may come in a little bit here to highlight some aspects to the audience who are listening in. So, we are reading a lot about companies wanting to hire leaders to manage their ESG initiatives in their journey towards a cleaner and cleaner processes. Do you believe, Soham and Pragya, that having the right people to drive this is enough to be BRSR ready? Or is it a good idea to also leverage internal processes, compliance management solutions, tool-based offerings within an organization? So, can you share some of your views on what you feel about this question?
Sure.
Yes,
So,
Pragya.
Andhra, indeed, if you look at the way BRSR is structured, we see that there are disclosure requirements from different kind of operations or different kind of functions of a company. So, say for example, the compliance is related to number of the minimum wages that is being paid or more than minimum wages that is being paid, or for example the training programs that are being given, and then if we see the social impact assessments that are being done due to the operations that are being carried out, or say for example the environmental related disclosures. So there are different kind of disclosure requirements which the different members or the different teams of the company would have information about. So yes, the people who drive to report BRSR will differ from team to team. However, at the same time, it would be necessary for companies to have an ESG leadership who can guide the companies through to how they can maintain their operations through and through to become aligned with the ESG parameters that are there globally currently.
Right. So,
Uh,
do you have any thoughts given the fact that most of the compliances or say disclosures required in the report are basically outcomes of compliances which are currently law for several organizations. So, for instance, in Principle 6 itself, Pragya mentioned that there are a lot of waste tons and recycled amount and reused and disposed amount kind of a data which is required. So, say a manufacturing industry would possibly generate all these forms of waste. So, do you think that processes and these are already existing law? So, what could an organization do to leverage existing information already residing with it?
With respect to this requirement, this new the BRSR requirement now, companies are absolutely going ahead and engaging ESG leaders into the processes. However, having said that, like in the absence of a proper governance system to ensure that the company do not runs basis individuals, but rather runs on the governance mechanism is very, very essential. As a part of this as well, I mean, there are multiple disclosures in the BRSR which currently are statutory mandates. For example, there are disclosures with respect to environment impact assessment notification, which is applicable for many manufacturing setups. So in this kind of a situation, having a compliance management system in place would help in collating information from multiple operating units and help in getting a consolidated version of the data that is sought to be filled into the BRSR report.
Sure.
Also,
So,
a tool of sorts on BRSR would help in where it would actually help in collation of all the information that is being gathered across all the operating units of a particular company, which will actually then go out as one single report.
sure, so and just for the audience who are listening out there, the Lexplosion Commerce solution we went through and we saw several disclosures which are required in this report are parts of existing enactments, and if those are complied holistically, several of your disclosures can be addressed by having an effective mechanism like commerce in your systems. And also, as an FYI, we are in the process of launching a tool which will help you be BRSR ready.
Principle 7 wants businesses to engage in influencing public and regulatory policy in a manner that is responsible and transparent. So, there are disclosure requirements under this principle relating to the company's affiliations to trade and commerce industries like a CII or a SOCAM, etc. These trades and trade and industry chambers make recommendations and propositions with regard to current business trends and helps in shaping public policies. So this disclosure aims to assess the importance that a company lays on its own role in influencing environment and social policies over and above the mere objective of conducting businesses.
The next principle, that is principle 8, it stresses on businesses' responsibility to promote inclusive growth and equitable development in their companies. This principle engages businesses to innovate and contribute towards the overall development of the country. In furtherance to this, businesses have to disclose the social impact assessment that their projects have basis the applicable laws like right to fair compensation, transparency in land acquisition, rehabilitation, resettlement act. Companies also have to brief the names and details of the project, whether the social impact is conducted by independent external agency, and if the results are communicated in the public domain. So, for example, if we take a steel manufacturing company which is trying to set up a mine for extracting iron ore as a raw material in a location which would require rehabilitation and resettlement of the residents of that area, the company would have to give the project affected people a compensation for doing the same. So, the company will have to make disclosures regarding this compensation that they have paid to such persons, the number of such persons who are affected, etc., thereby ensuring transparency in the activities and the operations.
Now, principle 9 of this of the BRSR focuses on businesses engaging with their consumers in a responsible manner. So this principle requires businesses to disclose the mechanisms that they have taken to receive and respond to consumer complaints. The number of complaints they have received from consumers with respect to data privacy, advertising, cybersecurity, unfair trade practices, etc., and the complaints for which resolution is still pending, along with the reasons for for them being pending. Also, companies are required to disclose the corrective actions that they undertake on issues such as advertising. So what is interesting to note here that the Central Consumer Protection Authority has recently issued a guideline called the Prevention of Misleading Advertisements and Endorsements for Misleading Advertisements 2022. As the name suggests, these guidelines provide rules for prevention of false or misleading advertisements. Thus, the regulators are trying to be more stringent on the advertisement measures that companies undertake. It is time that the companies should relook at their advertising practices and check if it is playing foul of these guidelines. They should take corrective actions right away to avoid consumer complaints on these aspects.
Yeah, so if I may, so we see the kind of interplay between principle 2 and principle 9 as Soham explained. That principle 2 talks about providing safe and sustainable products, And 9 talks about the overall consumer interest and not defrauding them, not making false claims and commitments. So let us look at how an FMCG sector would have to calibrate its operations to not be in flout of Principle 2 and Principle 9. So say the FMCG sector, the businesses are required to disclose all information accurately. And this time in the BRSR report, the labelings above the Legal Metrology Act have been sought for. So they want to know what more are you informing the consumers. They want to know whether you've done the right market research before launching products. They want you to know whether you have intimated the marginalized and the vulnerable community about the side effects, the harmful effects, the risks associated with these products, so that they can convince themselves that it is safe for them to therefore go ahead and use it in a responsible manner. You also need to keep a track of the complaints that you receive for false advertisements. You need to keep a record of all information which show that you have tried to deceive, tried to bait the consumer to buy in your products. So there's a lot of work which needs to happen, and FMCG sector may have to constantly factor and disclose all information which is accurate, not misleading, not false, so that the overall commitment towards the society at large is met.
Now that we have gone through the practicality of these 9 principles, what I can safely say is that companies have to gear up if they want to put up an attractive ESG report, considering that BRSR will be available in the public domain.
Sure, totally agree with that, and more because BRSR is a part of the annual report. Organizations would have to undergo statutory audit for these disclosures. So it's not something that is just up there. This is evidence-based data that an organization is projecting, and it's all on the organization whether it wants to project itself in good light or whether it wants to improve with time. So I think the direction is more towards over a course of period to be ESG compliant and to take responsibility, to be conscious towards the environment, which is the larger interest of BRSR and global ESG. For all you know, the smallest organizations could be the largest contributors to pollution in the country. So therefore, the drift is towards including more and more organizations as we advance with BRSR with the top 1,000 listed entities first. But irrespective of size and ownership, we do see the sense in the MCA committee report as well as what we are reading. And the trend which Soham spoke of some time back, that in a staggered phase-wise manner, this would eventually apply to even the smallest organizations. So it's better we proactively embrace the report and start preparing it, even if it's on a voluntary basis for the time being. One more aspect I wanted to mention, that even if you do not address a particular disclosure or it's answered in the negative, it may not per se be a non-compliance, but the next investor who is looking at your report may not have a very good impression.
Thank you so much for those inputs, Antara. And now, without any further ado, let's move ahead with our discussion with the panelists. The first panelist that we have on board with us is Mr. Gaurang Shah. He is the Vice President of Legal Corporate Affairs and the Company Secretary for Ajanta Pharma, and has served the industry since more than 25 years now. We also are joined by Ms. Saloni Fadnis, who is the Deputy Company Secretary of Asian Paints, who has played her stint in the industry since more than 12 years now.
Good afternoon, Saloni. It's great to have you on board. We understand that Asian Paints had gone ahead and took a shot at the report for the financial year 21-22 on a voluntary basis. So could you tell us some of the practical difficulties that you faced while preparing this report? And if you have any recommendations for the audience who are attending the session today?
Okay. Thanks for the question, Antara. So Asian Paints did publish on a voluntary basis the BRSR report for the financial year 21-22. As you all know, that the BRSR, this format of the BRSR report is much wider than the existing BRR report that we have been publishing so far. It is a combination of various standards like the GRIs, SDGs, SSBs, etc., all put together in SEBI's own format of ESG reporting. So, the practical difficulties were many. So once companies start putting in the data, start collating the data and putting it in the format that is expected to be published, they'll realize that a lot of information may or may not be readily available. specifically for the past years, because in many instances you are not only required to disclose for the current year and the reporting year in the past year, but maybe in some instances the information is required for up to 3 to 5 years. So that will be one space where we face difficulty for collating the past information. Also, one thing which helped us over here was starting early. So sometime this time last year is when we started to review the format, start collating the information, reaching out to various functions in the organization. Because although in case of Asian Paints, the office of the company secretary led this report, but it is not necessarily that all the information came in from us. So your HR teams, the teams which are handling sustainability will be your key stakeholders who will have to be onboarded with the requirements of this format. So starting early would be the key. Ensure another thing which helped us here was to put in the start collating the report with the previous year's information which was readily available. So if there were any difficulties which were coming in with the existing set of information, we were aware about it very much in advance, and we could put in place the required systems to start collating the information if we have not already done it. So again, starting right now would be the key.
Great. That's insightful, Saloni. Thanks a lot for your views. Mr. Shah, if you have any views on this, please go ahead. And what would be your advice to companies who should drive this internally? Like, should it be the compliance team? Should it be every function head? So, what is your advice on that sole driver of the BRSR report in your organization?
Yeah, Andra, thanks for the question. Thing is, it's a new thing for the corporates, and it has been challenging, quite a challenging task for all those who have started preparing the report. The first of its kind, and as mentioned by Saloni, it is unlike BRR. It's a very exhaustive format, and a lot of data information required to be compiled. And since many in the company are not aware of the actual requirements of BRSR, we need to first sensitize them, educate them as to what are the requirements to be, which we need from them, what kind of data, what kind of information is required to be, collected, compiled, and to be presented in that format which is prescribed.
Right.
So firstly, what I see is that it should be driven from the top. Then only that seriousness comes, it percolates down to the end people. And once that kind of message is conveyed to everyone, they become serious about compilation of all the information and data. And then we start putting in the blocks and make the report ready for publication. But what the difficulty that we faced is that initially people were really not aware of what is BRSR, what is ESG, what kind of actions are required to be taken. And then we started with educating them firstly as to what kind of information, what kind of data is required to be processed, and what is ESG, what is the kind of actions to be taken, initiatives to be taken by all concerned, and then started getting the required data from them. But again, a lot of push is required from the sector department in getting the timely data. That is very crucial. We had to continuously follow with them for getting the required information, data, and we had to literally educate them and push them for getting the data. That is very important. Secondly, starting early is very important. Like as Saloni mentioned, we also started last year, sometime in August, September, to get the things going. And since it was first year, it was a big challenging task for everybody. But we could, overcome all the problems and, started compiling all the data, and that's how it is journey.
Sure. So sensitization is the key here. Driving from the top is the key here. Saloni, any views from you on this?
No, I'm totally aligned with what Gauranji said. So, like he mentioned, that start early. speak to all your stakeholders. So what we did was that although the format is principle wise, right, but there are no principal stakeholders in the organization. It could be a mixed match of various people working on those particular aspects. So what worked for us? So the initial work that we did was we divided it within various people or various functions who are responsible for those things, and we put all of that information together. So throughout the BRSR report and wherever it is appearing in different principles, etc., and we took them through the format. We like I mentioned, the first thing which really helped us was collating the past year's information. So we the first draft of the report was for 2021. So we put in whatever information was there. So we realized what are the gaps which are coming up. If some information has to be called up from some vendors that we are working with, or it is collated at plant level and may or may not be in sync with how it is required in the BRSR report. So in cases like this, it always helps to collate the past information. For a company like Asian Paints, which is a paint manufacturing company. So although we do come in the FMCG sector, we are a red category chemical manufacturer. So for us, the whole data around emissions, the data around water consumption, etc., was the key. So we focused on all of that information, ensure that we had it in place. We had the mechanism which was there to collate it at all our manufacturing units and other places of operation. And that really helped us with ensuring that the report, we could publish this report on a voluntary basis and within time. The other thing which also helped us was determining the boundary of the report. So we have, all the information that we have given is on standalone basis. So it is for Asian Paints India. And we could not for this particular year cover all our units, etc., our subsidiary companies in India or abroad, etc. So we determined the boundary and worked towards it. So sensitization, like he mentioned, starting right now. Collating the information, ensuring that you really work with the people with the various functions to actually collate this information will help.
One thing I'd like to add here is that, see, since it's a new thing for everyone within the company, though we are taking a lot of initiatives on ESG front, but the data compilation is a big task. People, so far we've been taking initiatives, but the data, keeping of data in the right format, in the right places is not there, or maybe it is scattered. So getting that data and educating people to collect the right data and take ownership of the things, that is very, very important. We need to drive that point that this is going to be future, and we need to be ready for all this compilation of data, whatever actions we are taking on ESG front. Not only actions are required, but the data compilation of that and putting the things in the right order is very, very important for everyone. So that kind of message has to be passed and percolated so that the things turn out to be right. Yeah.
So my next question would be to Mr. Garang. So given that BRSR requires an exhaustive compilation of data where information will be required to be assembled from multiple operating units of your company spread across the country. So say like Ajanta Pharma must have a lot of operating units in different states, different cities in India. So how have you decided or planned to drive this internally to prepare this overall data that BRSR requires? Since we consider that all the information is coming from all different operating units overall in India.
Yeah, that's really a big challenging task, because we have 7 factories across the country, and there are 3 R&D units, and there are several offices in different parts of the country. So getting the information from all these locations and heads was a challenging task. But what we did is, initially we had started sessions with each and every factory people and the other department heads to sensitize them as to what kind of requirements are there and what kind of data is required from their side. And then on an ongoing basis, we interacted with them to provide the information, to provide whatever data is required for compilation. And though it was a difficult task, but with continuous follow-up and continuous interaction with them, we could manage it somehow. So I mean it's a challenge to get the information from all the units, but it has to be driven properly, so that you get the information on time.
Thank you, Gaurav and Sydney, for all the inputs. Now, Saloni, a very specific question to you on this is that the BRSR report requires disclosures such as the percentage of employees or the workers, including permanent and other non-permanent workers, covered by paternity benefits, things like daycare facilities. So now we understand that currently there is no statutory mandate like to grant the paternity leave, and in the absence of a complementary state rules on creche, like how do you plan to report this information in the BRSR?
Yeah. So I mean that was something that they went a little over and above the legal requirements, but essentially that is what ESG reporting or working in the whole ESG phase is about. So actually assess the requirements of all your stakeholders, take into account and ensure that your organization has policies and practices in place which benefit and help the stakeholders. So fortunately for Asian Paints, being an organization, so since the question was about employees and the paternity and care facility, the leave and about creche, etc. So fortunately for us, all of these schemes, programs, processes, etc. have been in place. So it was a reporting of something that we have been doing. So it was not like a challenge that personally came my way, because for at all our locations, etc., we do have these creche facilities, etc., in place, and there is a policy on paternity leave for eligible employees, etc. So we did report about it. So here for organizations where such facilities are either not available or policies are not in place, if that is not something that you can address, or that is something not that you cannot address right now, then it will be something that you just report about as to not being there, or that reporting will have to be done because it's very quantitative and numerical. So if you see the format, they're going to ask you for exact number of people who are within the scheme and then eventually have availed of it, etc., with percentages to see how the whole thing is working out. So if you have things like this in place, you publish about it, or else you can also use this opportunity to take it up with your HR team or with various other teams who are the stakeholders for this, to see if such practices or policies can be implemented and put in place for your employees and other stakeholders. So that would be something that I would suggest.
Thank you so much, Saruni, for that. This basically it boils down to, again, one very, very essential point, which is start early. And if you think so, if organizations take that as a prerogative, in the absence of any statutory mandate, to start making changes to that effect, so that eventually going forward we can start reporting on it in an affirmative. However, obviously, since it's not a statutory mandate and it just basically requires a disclosure, then organizations may even not go ahead and do it. But having said that, it definitely drives an impact on people or the investors or the public at large for an organization which is going public with such a.
Yeah. And I would just want to add, probably for companies who have already adopted integrated reporting and are publishing the 6 capital-wise data with the quantitative data flowing in through the GRI standards. I think this is something, most of the information that is being sought will be available, or at least there will be some systems and processes in place to account for this information. So for organizations who are publishing integrated reporting, I think the difficulty level will be moderate.
Got it. Thank you so much, Salman. Thank you so much.
So, Mr. Garam, if we see the structure of the BRSR format, the section C, it is divided. It requires disclosures in two formats. One is the essential indicators and one is the leadership indicators, where the essential leadership indicators are mandatory for companies to file, whereas leadership indicators are voluntary for them if they want to disclose information with respect to this or not. So, what are your views regarding the information that is being sought under these leadership indicators, and do you think that Indian corporates can raise the bar to elevate its governance and social standards by taking the initiatives that have been asked for disclosures under the leadership indicators?
Yeah, Pragya. As I mean, leadership indicators want companies to take proactive actions on these fronts. And as we know, government and international community is putting more and more thrust on ESG reporting and ESG standards to be followed, ESG initiatives to be taken, sustainability, social accountability, and all that. So basically, they want corporates to drive it, and it is not going to be only limited to the essential indicators. They want companies to be proactive in taking actions on the leadership indicators also. So they want, that should be idealistic situation. They want companies to not only limit themselves to do the things which are essential, but they want them to go beyond that and take actions which are required on non-mandatory basis also. So ultimate aim and objective is to ensure that companies are taking various steps, not only for on the ESG front, but also on the social accountability and well-being of all the stakeholders. So basically, the push from the government is that you not only limit yourself for essential indicators, but you also take proactive actions on the non-essential indicators like leadership indicators, and that should be the end objective for all the companies. So I think Indian corporates are still not ready, but going forward, we need to take actions on those fronts also, and that is going to be the future. And government is also wanting the corporates to be more agile and to be more responsive about taking all these actions.
Yeah, I just
That was one
want
of the
to add.
reasons why we started early, and though it was not mandatory for us to present the BRSR report for 21-22, but we took it as a challenge and we started to give it a go, so that we are future ready and we take the actions which are required to be taken in the coming years. And everybody, all the corporates, whether they like it or not, we have to accept the situation that these non-financial parameters also are equally important for the corporates, and they should also take and be ready for taking all the actions which are required to be taken on the non-financial parameters also. So that is the message which the government is trying to push through the corporates. Yeah.
So I just want to add over here that so what at Asian Paints we did attempt to disclose the leadership indicators as well to the extent we could. So probably so leadership indicators are basically going beyond you as your organization, your immediate stakeholders. It will extend to your value chain partners. What are the practices and policies that you have in place for the people or the vendors specifically, either forward or backward that you're working with? So what is the kind of philosophy that you're driving down? What are the review mechanisms in place? Are there any documented existing policies which are there for all of your value chain partners? So essentially leadership indicators are all around it. So right now they are obviously they are voluntary, but we did attempt to disclose it to the extent we could. So wherever we have policies in place which could be reported under the leadership indicators, or we already do have some information which can be published to the extent we could, we did make an attempt to even cover the leadership indicators under each and every principle to the extent that we could. So probably corporates can take that approach rather than completely shying away from or just disclosing information under the leadership indicators.
So
It is not only limited to reporting whatever are required to be done, whatever information is you have under the leadership indicators. Firstly, you need to take actions on those fronts, and then only you will have something to showcase and put it under the leadership indicators. So what is more important for the corporates is to initiate the actions on these fronts so that it is, followed in letter and spirit by everyone.
Correct. So, thank you, Saloni and Mr. Gaurang, for these insights. So, we understand that even if we do not file, if the corporates not file any disclosures under the leadership indicators, it would not give them any negative point or any penalty or something related to that. But it will give a positive impression on the stakeholders who are looking at the report, on the regulators, on the investors, on all the other stakeholders that are involved. So, it would be better if the corporates can to as much extent they can to disclose the information under the leadership indicators as well, is what I understood.
That's right. Yeah.
That's right. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, we have the next question, and I'm sure I realize that this may be too early to talk about, but and then especially when companies are grappling to cope up with the report presently. But Saloni and Mr. Shah, do you see some kind of a scoring metrics which will eventually get ascribed to every disclosure, given that this is now a evidence-based data, unlike BRR, where you need to actually give facts and figures? So, basis that, do you anticipate the regulators coming out and giving a scoring, and then organizations being rated accordingly?
Yeah, I think that is going to be the future. Today, government is, wanting the corporates to take actions on these non-financial parameters, and going forward, they would actually see what drive the companies are doing on the ESG parameters, and just to assess what action the company has taken. They would come out with some sort of rating of what initiatives have been taken on these fronts, and that would enable the investor community as well as the government to assess what companies are doing, and whether they are doing the things right, and what anything further to be done. As of now, I think there are some agencies like CRISIL and others who are doing this ESG assessment or ranking on ESG parameters, and going forward, I think maybe government would also make it mandatory, or maybe a few years down the line, to make it mandatory for all the companies to assess themselves on this rankings. Yeah, I mean, Saloni, what's your view on that?
Yeah, no, I'm absolutely aligned with what you're saying. So this is going to be yet another ESG rating that is going to come our way. There are so many of them already. And since SEBI has come up with such a prescriptive format about, give this data, this percentage in this unit and stuff like that, definitely they're going to, come up with some rating around it, where, there would be scoring of companies, etc. Like all, the other, so say there is MSCI, there is DJSI, there's so many of them out there who are already, giving out ESG ratings on the basis of some are active, some are passive, etc. So this will kind of be like a more active reporting, where the company reports, they see the data and they come up with a score. So here the only thing, would be that probably if they come up with like a sector-based scoring, I think that will kind of make a little bit more sense, because say probably comparing a chemical manufacturing company with, say, maybe an IT company, which would anyways be a little all of that. I mean, if they come up with something which is a little sector specific, or at least bifurcates organizations that way, and then comes up with the industry leader or a benchmark, that will probably be my unsolicited advice to SEBI.
Absolutely.
Thank you
so much, Saloni. Thank you so much, Mr. Shah. So we have many attendees who have logged in today. So we would like to take some questions and respond to them, and would want you to share your expertise on that as well. So we look at the first question.
If we see the first question, question is that considering most of the disclosures that are required in the BRSR report we see are emanating out of the compliances which are already existing in the law. So, do you think that reporting in BRSR as well as the compliances that are there in the law will lead to duplication in any kind of reporting?
Yeah, okay, so I can probably take the question. So duplicacy will definitely be there, like we discussed earlier. So for companies who have already adopted integrated reporting and are disclosing a lot of information as per the GRI standards or whatever that they are adopting, a lot of this quantified information will be available elsewhere, forming part of the annual report. I think companies can definitely give references to where they are already disclosing this information at some other place, and avoid duplicacy and avoid making the annual report.
Yeah, I agree to what she's saying.
Yeah, so even if we see the guidance note also similarly gives in guidance that there is interoperability that can be done if we have made disclosures in these globally accepted formats. So we can cross-refer the pages and the disclosures that are there to the BRSR report as well.
So the next question, Gautamji, if you would want to take it up, I'll just repeat the question what we received. So, what are the guidelines for unlisted companies, and where can we find that? So, with respect to unlisted companies, if there is any
companies,
path,
I wouldn't know about it because being in a listed company, we have been following all the listed company guidelines and regulations. But as regards non-listed companies, I would really need to check on that. I mean,
sure. So,
Okay, so probably if I can add,
yes.
so the MCA and SEBI have actually proposed something called as BRSR Lite, which is proposed for unlisted companies and which is supposed to come in the future. So I think MCA has a 5-year pipeline for implementing the ESG report disclosure requirements to all companies, including unlisted companies. But there is no format or any guidance on BRSR Lite which is available at present. But for unlisted companies, I think the BRSR Lite format is what will be applicable.
I think that BRSR format is to be prescribed in some time.
Yeah.
Yeah, we got the next question. Pretty interesting, actually. We are an ITS company, and several of the disclosures required, especially ones around environmental data, are not relevant to our industry. Any clarification on what should be recorded under those?
Simply don't disclose. You're in a lucky situation.
Yeah.
If you are not manufacturing any products and you are in the services segment, you can simply state that since the organization is not into any kind of products manufacturing, the information relating to XYZ may not be available. And if so say for example, somebody from the services industry was mentioning this, right? I read it in the chat. So for them, what would be the sustainable sourcing options would be the power that they consume. So they could, probably opt for renewable energy sources, and the others would be around employees. It would be around other stakeholders. It could also be around sustainably, carrying out their logistic operations, etc. So those are some of the things that wherever possible they could probably comment on, and be happy, don't report.
Sure.
So it revolves around 3 things basically: reduce, recycle, and reuse. So wherever they can do, reduction of pollution or reduction of environmental damage, or reuse whatever that they've done, which is waste, reuse of waste and recycling of waste, or maybe reduction of water intake and water usage and all that. These are the areas which where the service industry can also contribute in improving the environment.
Sure. We have the next question. Pragya, you will want to take up the next question?
Sure. So the next question we have is that if there is any inaccurate information that we give, or if there is if we do not provide certain disclosures, or if we do not file the BRSR, will there be any penalty that is imposed, or will any action being taken against the companies if the information is inaccurate?
See, as of now, though, BRSR is not mandatory for any companies. This is non-mandatory for the first, going forward, it will be made mandatory for the first 1,000 companies by way of market cap. And that also, currently I don't see any kind of such provisions coming in. Government is just trying to, push the companies to perform on these indicators and try and disclose the data to the extent possible. But maybe a few years down the line, these things may come in. As of now, I don't see any such regulations which are providing any sort of penalties or violation things being charged for by the government. I don't think so. What do you say, Saloni?
Yeah, there are two parts of the question which was asked. One was about whether disclosing or not disclosing. So like Mr. Gaurang mentioned that from 22-23, this is mandatory to disclose to karna hi hai if you fall within the top 1,000 listed companies, right? So I think there you cannot escape. The second thing is the format is very prescriptive. It asks for specific information, and I don't think you can tamper with the format. So you will have to stick to the format that is given, put in information wherever applicable, wherever available and applicable, and whatever information is not there, I think you can mention that currently this information is not available, or it is available only for this year and we do not have it for the past 3 years or something. Probably do it to the extent possible. And the second part of the question was about mistakes. So like everything else that you publish in your annual report, accuracy will in fact will have to be maintained, and I really don't know what to say about it. Just try to be as accurate as possible, and like you do with everything else that you publish in your annual report.
Correct. Yes. Thank you so much, Saloni and Mr. Gaurang.
Yeah.
So,
yes, sure. So the last, probably the last question that we take up for the day is, so we received a particular question which says that the guidance tips for filing of BRSR, is there any guidance tips for filing of the BRSR? Because earlier people used to file with the BRR, and now with the BRSR coming into the place, are there any guidance with respect to BRSR? So Saloni, if you could take that.
Yeah, so SEBI does have a guidance note on how to publish the data for BRSR. It is pretty descriptive and gives you a lot of help about what information is to be put in and how it needs to be put in, etc. So I think you people can refer to the guidance note for any inputs that are required. The only other thing is that many a times at places we do tend to write sentences instead of putting the exact information. But the second aspect to this will also be the XBRL reporting of BRSR, which actually does not allow any kind of remarks to be entered, and you will have to be very specific and stick to the format. So either you enter the information or you don't enter the information. So the advice would be stick to the guidance note, stick to the format, and provide information in the manner it is required.
Thank you so much, Saloni. Thank you for that.
Yeah, I think one last question we'll just squeeze in. Is BRSR applicable to all unlisted foreign subsidiary companies in case of a consolidated group financials, or only to the listed company?
Applicable only to listed companies, not to foreign subsidiaries as such, because it's all applicable to only Indian companies. That's what I believe.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. So it's applicable to the prescribed group of companies. I'm not sure whether the question is about applicability or is it about the reporting boundary. So if
Asked
you,
whether it's
yeah, so I'm not sure whether the question is asked that way. If it is about the reporting boundary, then there is, the BRSR format specifically requires you to define the reporting boundary. And if at all you are disclosing information, like in the annual report, we do disclose information on a consolidated basis about all our operations worldwide, etc. So, and if you wish to extend the scope of BRSR to also cover your unlisted foreign subsidiaries, if that is the case, I think it'll be a welcome sort of thing, and you can definitely do that after clearly defining the reporting boundary.
Sure. We are conscious of the time and we recognize it's past 4. And with this, so we will come to an end of today's session. On behalf of Lexplosion, I would like to take this opportunity to thank our panelists, Saloni Parnis and Gaurang Shah, for sharing their experiences and responding to the various questions. Our CEO Indranil Chaudhary and COO Siddharth Singh for their constant guidance and valuable inputs as we prepared for this. My colleagues Pragya, Soham, Shaikat, and Team Lexplosion for all their efforts. And last but not the least, a very big thank you to all attendees who have taken time out to join us today.